London, how we doing? We all right? All right. My name is Ben Bailey Smith. I'm an artist born and bred in West London. Before I got into show business, I spent 10 years as a youth worker, working in youth clubs in Edgware Road, in Paddington, in Queen's Park, Maida Vale, set up my own youth center for the children of refugees and asylum seekers in Queen's Park. So I had quite a profound shift from working in my community, working with local people and working with people from overseas, living beneath the poverty line, into show business. Quite a big shift, to be honest. I've always kept one eye on the community that I came from. And last year, there was a huge tragedy, and I have to say a travesty, that occurred right in the center of my old stomping grounds, essentially, in the fire that engulfed the Grenfell Tower, causing multiple fatalities. Fascinatingly, out of that fire, a phoenix arose in the shape of Justice for Grenfell, which is a community-led, non-profit organization fighting for justice in an area where no one else was willing to go. It's a tough fight. It's an incredible fight. It's one that I've been privileged enough to see up close. And tonight I want to share with you some of the stories from right within that organization. What we have for you is something unique, a real piece of insight, I would say. We're going to kick off with the co-founder of Justice for Grenfell. She's somebody who's lived and worked in the area for over 30 years, working on a community level. She's worked with CPS, fighting hate crime. I mean, this is an incredible woman. She's an MBE on top of everything else. Please make her feel welcome. It's Yvette Williams. Yvette, pleasure. Just kick off by letting us all know how you got involved in Justice for Grenfell. I mean, it's my understanding there wasn't really a Justice for Grenfell until you became involved. So.
Okay, so I'm an ordinary woman. I'm a mother. I worked for the state for 15 years, etc. I'm actually called to the tower that night by a friend of mine who lives in what we call the finger blocks that run under the tower, Testerton Walk, who says to me she's been evacuated from her flat and if I could bob down and pick her up. So I actually awake my 10-year-old daughter who's in the house with me and drive down just thinking that I'm just going to pick her up and bring her back to our home for a while. We'd had other fires in the area that had stayed contained. By the time we drove down, we could see the tower through the trees, and literally we stood there helpless and watched that building burn until we left there about 7:30 in the morning.
So talk me through those early stages. Obviously, there's a lot of panic, there's a lot of confusion. What were your first thoughts in the immediate aftermath?
In the immediate aftermath, for me, it was surreal, and I felt like that for many days. My coping mechanism was to go and work in one of the donation/relief centres to try and kind of get my mind around that. Once I could kind of have a feel about the chaos and stuff that was going on, I knew that the issues leading up to Grenfell had been huge. I've lived in that community for many years, so I know a lot of the issues that happen there. And you just come to a point where my father always used to say to me, stand up for something or you will fall for anything. And I think that's where I cross a border. because I've worked on community campaigns before, but I was always quite happy to just be a background person in the scenes, and actually 2 people said to me, this is your time to step up, and it's that, if not you, who?
Yeah.
And so that's how the
right
campaign came about.
right at the start, even within 24 hours, you were aware of a sense of injustice, or it reminded you in some way of those kind of miscarriages of justice against people who may be are struggling to have a voice within what we might call the mainstream? Did you sense all of that early on, or was that something that...
We have to answer, on the lead up to the fire at Grenfell Tower, we had other things happening in our community that we were campaigning about. So our play service was cut. There was a move to close our library. The way that the north of the borough was treated to the south of the borough over decades was quite clear. So Grenfell it's almost like our community paid the ultimate price at Grenfell.
So there was already a sense of the residents of Grenfell not being heard way before the tragedy struck.
Yeah, and it's a bit more than just not being listened to. There was also a sense of being treated unequally, regardless of who we were. We're all ordinary people, working class community, doing our thing in one of the richest boroughs in Britain. But there was that, it wasn't only being heard, it was because we lived in a particular locality, in particular types of housing, that we should be treated somehow differently, and that difference was in an unequal balance.
Right. So we talked off stage a little bit about those very early stages of justice for Grenfell, and you were telling me about a flat nearby where operations began. Just let people know a little bit about those early stages, what you were doing.
Okay, so I talked to another local community person, Ishmael Blagrove III, who I've known for many years. And we said, okay, then let's kind of get an engine going. And that was mainly for kind of people coming into the area and getting information. So we worked out of Ishmael's basement flat. And because there was so much chaos going on those first few weeks, when people like the bereaved families who came into the area trying to get information about, their relatives that lived in the town and that, people would just direct them to the basement and just say, they'll know what's going on down there. So for actually the first part of the campaign, we're actually almost caseworking people, finding them lawyers, telling them where to go in terms of getting donations, telling them where they can find out additional information, etc. It's only kind of later on that the campaign develops into something that it's come to now.
And 1 year on, now, as you say, where are we with Justice for Grenfell?
I think we've kept what happened at Grenfell in the public eye, and I think that's been important. We don't want it to be lost from the public consciousness. We're also, it's not just about our community anymore, it's not just about North Kensington. There are hundreds of buildings up and down the country as we speak, where people are living, where that same thing could happen that happened at Grenfell. It impacts us all, and everybody should be outraged at this. There's kind of, looking at the response to the fire in terms of the fire service and kind of realising that we've sat back for many years and let our fire service be cut. We've taken responsibility for, fire safety regulations, the very things that keep us safe, to be housed somewhere else. And I think if you look at the demographic of the people that lived in Grenfell Tower itself, you start to see some other issues around inequality that come to the fore, whether that be disability, whether that be, issues around gender. The amount of children and women that died in the building is quite high. I think it also, for me, one of the positives is it shows kind of what the great British public can do, because people came from far and wide to volunteer, to send donations. Do you know what I mean? The world internationally has looked at this and feels some kind of equity with that.
Definitely, that sense of injustice hit us all, and it's vital that that you keep that awareness going. And I think I can speak for everybody in here when I say that we wish you the best moving forward for what is an incredible year's work. Ladies and gentlemen, Yvette Williams.